Okay, I think we will get started. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. So my name's Tiana. I'm from Green Energy Trading, and my co-presenter today will be my colleague Maddie from NCBA. Maddie, if you just don't mind going to the next slide for me.
Yep. There you go.
Perfect. So just a little bit about our background. So GET and NCBA, we're part of the broader Green Energy Group. So we're an Australia-wide group delivering end-to-end energy efficiency solutions across a diverse range of client needs. So GET and NCBA, we're on the certificate creation side of things. So we assist you with your STCs, your BECS, your ESCs, your PRCs, which is what we'll be talking about today. But we've got some other fantastic businesses within our group. So that's Green Energy Markets, who do a lot of insights. And then we've got Green Energy and Carbon Management and Outperformers Next, who are on the C&I side of things and have some fantastic engineering capabilities within those teams. Next slide, please, Maddie. Just a brief overview of our agenda today. We'll go through the SRES expansion, what we know so far. Then we'll go through the C&I opportunity in New South Wales in particular. So that's the changes to the peak demand reduction scheme. We've got some worked examples for you that show some indicative returns, both on the monetary side of things and certificates. We'll go through your IPART evidence requirements for BESS 3, 4, and 5, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Next slide, please, Maddie. Thank you. So we recently had the announcement that the SRES, so the Small Scale Renewable Energy Scheme, will be expanded up to 1 megawatt for your solar PV systems. So previously you could only install a system up until 100 kilowatt hours. Then anything over that became LGCs. But this is a pretty exciting new development. You'll be able to create STCs now on your systems from 100 kilowatt hours all the way through to 1 megawatt. So the expected start date for this is October 1, 2026. But it's just really important to note here that we are still waiting on formalised guidance and regulation for this activity. So absolutely stay tuned. We will provide all of the insights once that is all released. So I think a key thing to note here is that the system cannot exceed 1 megawatt. So you can't just claim up until 1 megawatt. It's a sort of hard stop there so that it still meets the definition of a small generation unit. The evidence requirements for this activity, as I said, are still being formalised, but something to keep in mind here is that we expect to see some supporting documentation that's similar to LGCs at the moment. So that's your structural engineering report that needs to be provided. So this is just to demonstrate that the roof or any supporting structures can sustain the weight of the panels. And another important thing to note here is that the deeming period is going to stay the same until December 31st, 2030 for all eligible C&I solar. So you won't be subject to that year-on-year decrease that you see for STCs that are under that 100 kilowatt hour threshold. And the federal government also announced that they are looking to legislate network speeding up network approvals for commercial PV. That remains to be seen. So fingers crossed they can get that across the line. But as mentioned, really exciting opportunity here within the C&I space. Stay tuned and we will share more when it's available. Next slide, please, Maddie. Perfect. So just a bit of a background of the PDRS, which is the Peak Demand Reduction Scheme. So this is a New South Wales specific state government scheme for financial incentives. So you can get a financial or a cash incentive for installing equipment like batteries at a New South Wales address that reduces the demand on the grid during periods of peak times. So we create the incentive, which is what's called a certificate or a PRC or a PRC, and then send it back to the installers or solution providers of that equipment. This scheme is legislated until 2050 and deeming periods do not reduce year on year. This is a completely different scheme to the SRES that creates your STCs for PV and battery installs and operates federally. It's important to note here that this is a market-based mechanism for the PDRS. So that means that prices fluctuate day to day. It's not like the SRES that has a clearinghouse and guarantees the dollar value of each certificate. Next slide, please, Maddie. Great, thank you. So I'll just give a background on each of the new activities that are going to be commencing from September 1, 2026, and then Maddie's going to take you through some specifics. So the first one is BESS 3, so this is for apartment blocks. This is new installs of batteries from a size of 20 kilowatt hours all the way up to 200. Of usable capacity, that is. So it's important to note here that the apartment blocks must have 4 dwellings or more. So if you only had 2 or 3, that's simply not eligible, but you might be able to receive support under the Cheaper Home Batteries program. No townhouses or villas are eligible for this one, even though they can be strated. Must be installed behind the meter and must be grid connected. So there is no off-grid support available under the PDRS. Only 1 battery is allowed per NMI, and this battery system must be installed outside. BESS 4 is then aimed at your small commercial businesses. The same threshold exists here, so that's your 20 to 200 kilowatt hours of usable capacity. No residential premises are eligible here, so the commercial eligibility is based on the building class, which is based on the NCC building code. So it's just building classes 1, 2, and 4 that are considered to be residential. So anything outside of that would fall under the commercial realm. So really important to note here as well that you can't have, say, a property that is residential and just has a home office or something like that. That's not going to count as commercial. But if you've got any queries about eligibility based on the type of building, we would really encourage you to reach out to us and we can assist there. No data centers are allowed. They've got to find other sources for their battery funding. And this also must be installed behind the meter and be grid connected. BESS 5, this is for your large-scale C&I battery installs. This is for batteries that are from 200 kilowatt hours all the way up to 30 megawatt hours of usable battery capacity. Important to note here that the incentive does cap out at 10 megawatt hours, but you're able to install up to that 30 megawatt hours. Again, no residential properties, no data centers, and must be installed behind the meter and be grid connected. So that's just a basic rundown of the 3 new activities that are available. And now Maddie's going to do a bit of a deep dive into some of the evidence requirements. So take it away, Maddie.
Thanks so much, Tiana. So, yeah, exactly. This is just a little bit more about the eligibility of these, different activities that we've got going. And we're just going to pull out a bit of the similarities and the differences between the apartment block, small commercial and large commercial battery eligibility that you have in each activity. So firstly, if the site is allowed to have an existing battery or not. So that is a little bit different under each activity. So under BESS 3 for apartment blocks, you can't have any existing battery allowed at the NMI. That was kind of mentioned on the last slide. For BESS 4 and 5, you just can't have a battery installed under the PDRS previously. So for that small scale commercial and that large scale commercial, they could have had a battery installed previously under Cheaper Home Batteries program or without a scheme at all, and you could go ahead and install a new battery under the PDRS and claim the incentive. But say you wanted to go back in 6 months' time to a premises you had already installed a battery up at and claimed the PDRS incentive and then install another battery, you wouldn't be eligible to claim the incentive again. So that's just something important to note. Questions about stackability with STCs. So for BESS 3 and for BESS 4, you can stack with both the Cheaper Home Batteries program for the battery itself, as well as claim any PV STCs for any extra solar or new solar that you're installing at any of these sites. BESS 5 we also expect will be stackable with PV under the expansion for the SRES, so up to 1 megawatt hour of solar. Do you have to have any existing PV at the site or any PV at all to claim the incentive? None of the sites require existing solar to claim the PRCs, but keep in keep in mind that the Cheaper Home Battery program does require it. So if you are intending to stack incentives for PRCs and battery STCs, you do have to have solar installed at the site for those Cheaper Home Battery STCs, either with the battery or installed previously. And then lastly, what battery products can you actually use and install under the scheme and be able to claim the incentive? So under BESS 3 and 4, the batteries must be on the CEC approved batteries list, and they have to be valid and active at the time of install. They also must meet the warranty requirements of the regulator, so of IPART, to be eligible for the scheme. So that means that they must have a warranty on the product for at least 10 years and guarantee that at least 70% of the usable battery capacity is retained after 10 years from the installation date. So not the manufacturer date, not the date that it was shipped from the manufacturing country, just the installation date. If you're concerned about any of your batteries that you're intending to use and install under this scheme, just recommend that you reach out to us and we can check the warranties for you to ensure that it meets those requirements. Lastly, for BESS 5, the approved products list is still to be confirmed at this stage. We are expecting it any day now, a rule change and a new method guide from the regulator. And there's no warranty requirements from the rule. So just your normal requirements and warranties will apply. And your battery just has to have a test certificate from your manufacturer. So please do make sure that you obtain this for any installs that you plan to do under BESS 5. Again, if you're signed up with us, then as soon as we get that rule change and that method guide update, we will be able to send you any of the changes that have been put in place from the regulator straight away. So for all three activities, there are inverter size requirements. I will run through this on the next slide, and it does impact your eligibility. And just be aware that all batteries, regardless of its BESS 3, 4, or 5, must be at least capable of connecting to the internet. So they don't need to be signed up to a VPP or a demand response aggregator to get the PRCs, but it must be capable to do it. Pretty much all batteries or battery systems with a new inverter are capable of connecting to the internet. So this shouldn't really be too concerning, but if you do have any concerns, feel free to reach out to us. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to go through some of the important requirements around the inverter and PV solar array sizes that's relevant whether you're installing in an apartment block or a smaller or larger commercial premises. So all battery installations have to comply with these inverter sizes and the PV sizes. So first I'll talk about the inverter eligibility. So the size of the inverter that you install with the battery for the peak demand reduction scheme must be at least 1/6 of the battery's usable capacity to be eligible. So another thing to note on this is that the calculation for the certificates will work based on either 90% of the nominal battery capacity or 4 times the inverter size, whichever is lesser. So the key here really is, if you want to maximize the incentives for your battery size, make sure that your inverter output is at least 1/4 the size of your battery capacity for the maximum incentives. So that makes sure that you meet not only your eligibility requirement to make sure that it's at least 1/6 the size of your battery, but it actually helps you to get access to the maximum incentive. So I've got a little example down the bottom here. So if you're installing a 100 kilowatt battery, your inverter must be at least 17 kilowatts to be eligible for PRC creation, because that's 1/6 of the battery capacity. So you can see here in the first example, it's too small because the inverter is only 1/10 of the battery size. In the middle, we've got the eligible option, and then at the end of the column with your 25 kilowatt inverter size, you've got your option that's going to give you the maximum incentive that you can create, because it's at least 1/4 of the usable battery capacity. Then I'll talk about the PV install eligibility. So like I said, there's no requirement for there to be PV at the site, but you can get about 33 to 47% extra PRCs for installing solar at the site within 90 days of the installation of the date of the battery. So to get this, you have to install at least 1/4 of the usable battery capacity size in additional PV at the site and install it within that 90-day window. So you are at a site that already has 10 kilowatts of solar and you want to get the extra solar, extra PRCs incentive. So on a battery that's 100 kilowatt hours, you need to install a solar array that's at least 25 kilowatts of PV at the site. So in this case, you have to install that as extra. So you've already got 10 kilowatts of solar at the site. You're going to add 25 kilowatts, which means that your overall total PV capacity at the site after the upgrade is now 35 kilowatts. So if you do less than that, you'll be able to claim the PRCs on the battery, but you won't be able to claim the 33% extra PRCs that you could potentially be eligible for. Again, the other thing to be really careful of around this PV requirement is that time limit. So once you install the solar, you have 90 days to go back and install the battery. So you can go ahead the day after you've installed that solar, you can go in, start installing the battery, and just make sure that it is completed before that 90-day timeline. If you go back and you install on the 91st day, then again, you're still able to claim the PRCs on that battery, but you won't be eligible for the extra 33% PRC creation and incentive. So I hope that clears up this kind of PV and inverter eligibility requirements. So now I'm going to work through some of the worked examples to just give you an idea of the actual dollar value incentives that you can get in different installing scenarios. So what's really important to note here across all three activities is that there's different levels of incentive depending on what you're doing at the site. Again, all for brand new installs of batteries at sites that are connected to the grid in this example. So in example 1, you're installing a larger battery, so 100.8 kilowatt hours of usable battery capacity. It's just gone over that threshold of the 100 kilowatt hours cheaper home batteries program incentive threshold. So you're not eligible for the cheaper home batteries program incentive. You've not installed solar at the site within 90 days of the battery installation, so you're also not eligible for the extra PRC incentive. So here comes the inverter output eligibilities. I used an inverter size that's greater than that minimum size requirement in this example, which in this case would be 17 kilowatts. But again, in every single example here, I haven't just gone for the minimum. I've gone for an inverter size that is at least 1/4 of the battery size so that we are using the actual usable battery capacity listed there at the top to calculate our incentive level. If, say, I installed a 20 kilowatt inverter, then our maximum incentive that we would calculate would actually only be 80 kilowatt hours because of the way that these incentives work, because that's 4 times of the inverter output. Last but not least, in BESS 3, something that is really important to consider that is different to all the other activities is you have to consider the number of dwellings in the apartment block, because that also plays into what size of battery will be eligible to install, or it will basically cap the incentive. So the incentive will be capped at 5 kilowatt hours per dwelling. So if you install a 50 kilowatt hour battery in an apartment block that only has 4 dwellings, your incentive will be calculated at 20 kilowatt hours of usable battery capacity, not at 50 kilowatt hours. That's because you've only got 4 dwellings in the block. So it's that 5 kilowatt hours multiplied by 4 dwellings, which gives you that 20 kilowatt hour of your max capacity. So this is really to ensure that you're not seeing oversizing of batteries in these apartment blocks. So again, in each of these examples, I've gone ahead and used a number of dwellings that will mean that we're using the actual usable battery capacity in all of these calculations. So you can see here we have in example 1 a pretty decent return from PRCs only. But again, that's because in this first example, you installed a battery that was too big for the Cheaper Home Batteries program incentive, so you're not getting those extra Cheaper Home Battery STCs. Then in example 2, again, you haven't installed solar, but you've installed a slightly smaller battery, so now it's eligible for the Cheaper Home Batteries stacked incentive. All the rest hasn't changed, but you can see that the incentive jumps by quite a bit. So as soon as you start to stack incentive, it starts to become a little bit more worthwhile. Even if you haven't installed the extra solar at the site, because that inhibits, we understand that there can be access issues that inhibit solar installations at apartment blocks. So now we have example 3. So again, slightly smaller battery, so it's stackable with that Cheaper Home Batteries incentive, but this time you're installing a solar array that's at least 1/4 of the battery capacity. So you're getting those extra PRCs that you're eligible for. So now you're getting a triple stacked incentive, and you can see that there's a pretty significant difference. Now we have the examples for BESS 4. So this is the small commercial installations. In each example, I've done a comparison of the incentive for the same battery size and inverter, only changing if it's been installed with extra solar or not, so you can see the difference in the incentive amount. I've just added the minimum size of extra or new PV that you have to install at the site to get the extra PRCs, which is always 1/4 of the battery size. So if you install more PV because the site allows or the customer wants it, your incentive will be higher for that. But again, I've just made sure that we're meeting, the minimum requirements to make sure that you get those extra PRCs, and you can kind of see what you're working with. So in example 1, I've used a 50 kilowatt hour usable battery capacity, which means you'll get the max Cheaper Home Batteries incentive to be able to stack on that incentive. Then example 2, that battery capacity is the same for that example in example 2 that I used in BESS 3. So again, shows you the incentive you can get when you stack the Cheaper Home Batteries STCs, but at that slightly larger battery size of around 100 kilowatt hours, sorry. And then we have example 3. I've used a larger battery at 150 kilowatt hours. This one isn't eligible to be stacked with the Cheaper Home Batteries program, but you can compare even when you aren't installing extra solar at the site. The incentive is quite a bit higher than the roughly 100 kilowatt hour battery that's the stacked incentive in example 2. So that's because the PDRS is accounting for the fact that you won't get that stacked Cheaper Home Battery incentive. So you aren't missing out on anything there in the small commercial incentives. So across all 3, you can see that there's a jump between the incentives when you install solar versus when you don't install solar, especially at the higher end. This tends to be a bit more impactful. And now we have BESS 5, which is the large commercial installation examples. So again, the key here is really to be aware of the difference that you can get for installing solar at the site. It can be up to about a 47% increased incentive in BESS 5 just for installing extra solar at the site. The main thing that I want to pull out on this slide is the difference between example 2 and example 3. So here, the solar that's installed at the site in example 2, the battery is smaller, but the incentive is higher than example 3 for the solar install example. So that's because in example 2, you've installed almost a 4 megawatt hour of battery capacity at the site with a 1 megawatt solar array, which meets your quarter solar install requirement to get the extra incentive. In example 3, you've installed a larger battery, so you have to install more than 1 megawatt of solar to make sure you install at least 1/4 of the usable battery capacity to get that extra incentive. Because you've installed more than 1 megawatt of solar, that makes you ineligible to create any STCs on the project. There might be other avenues that we can explore with you to create the incentives on the extra and solar installed at the site, so always have a chat with us. But in any case, the increase in incentive is still nothing to sniff at. That extra 33% for the PRCs alone versus from when you're installing solar to when you're not installing solar in that example 3. So it's still a significant difference. Okay, so now I'm going to take us through the evidence requirements. So what do you need to get access to those incentives? So for each job, you need to collect the following evidence, and there's a certain chronology that you need to follow of stuff you need to get done before and after the upgrade. I'm aware that all this information is a little bit more involved than the SRES for STC creations, if you're familiar with cheaper home batteries. So that's why we recommend you engage a really good ACP like us, who can make sure that you're really supported in this process. So what's exactly the same across all of the requirements? Well, pre-install, you need to make sure across all 3 activities that you get the electricity bill for the site. This will confirm the NMI that you're installing the battery at, which is what we use to confirm connection to the grid, which, as we mentioned, is a requirement under the PDRS. Get the nomination form signed by your customer that is purchasing the equipment. So as soon as possible before the installation starts, get that nomination form signed. Get all your planning and network approvals in place. On the planning and network approvals side of things, I'll go into more detail about CDCs, DAs, and network approvals in a minute. At the site, before you start replacing anything, take photos of all the existing equipment, the make, the model numbers, and the switchboard photo, just showing that there's no battery already connected, or photos of the existing battery if it wasn't installed under the PDRS previously, depending on which activity you're doing, and your installer selfie before they start the upgrade. So that's all your pre-upgrade evidence for every single job that you have to collect. Then post-installation, so for photos, you need to provide basically just all the same geotagged photos of all the new equipment that you have installed. So that's your PV, your inverters, your battery, any switchboard upgrades you did, all needs to be photographed. And we also just need all of their make and model numbers as well of whatever you installed for all of the new equipment. All signage that you had to apply to the battery, the inverter, and the switchboard for the battery and the PV. Any risk mitigation measures, or installer selfie, and also the installer selfie at commissioning. We'll have a slides later that kind of goes through these photo evidence requirements. Then in terms of documentation, we just need the CCEW for the battery and separately for the PV if you're claiming that extra incentive, the extra PV. And especially if the PV was installed on a different day, we need the CCEW for the battery and for the PV separately. An installer declaration, which is just co-signed by your installer and the customer post-installation, and the tax invoice and payment evidence of the job. So this is to prove that the minimum co-payment has been met for each activity. There's a slight difference in the amount that must be paid by the purchaser. in each activity. So for BESS 3, it's $1,000 plus GST. In BESS 4, it's $5,000 plus GST. And for BESS 5, it's not yet confirmed with the regulator, but we do expect that there'll be a minimum co-payment. This minimum payment cannot be refunded or reimbursed to your customer. There was a question about how people typically pass on the benefit to their customer that was submitted in some of the expression of interest for and signups for this webinar. And I just want to clarify that usually the incentive is applied as an upfront discount back to the customer on the initial quotation. So basically, yes, customers must pay something under the PDRS for their battery, and typically that incentive is given back as a discount upfront to the end user or to the end purchaser. So then I'll go through the differences across each activity. So pre-upgrade, just on BESS 3 and BESS 4, you do have to send the iPart fact sheet with the quotation to the customer. So at the time that you're quoting the customer, make sure that you send across that iPart fact sheet as well. We're aware that some people might already be quoting with their customers, which is totally fine. We just request that you resend the fact sheet with the quotation prior, or just as soon as possible prior to the installation of the battery at this point. Post-upgrade, the AS5139 requirements are needed. So that includes the risk assessment of the battery for BESS 3 and BESS 4, and the site map of the battery, which just confirms, its location and its clearance to exit windows. And also it should include things like if you installed a fire barrier, how tall and wide is it? And we really recommend any risk mitigation measures that you've actually installed to be listed on the site map. For BESS 5, this isn't required, as AS5139 requirements are not applicable to batteries over 200 kilowatt hours according to the standards. So it's just the wiring standards in BESS 5 that you have to comply with. And obviously for all BESS 3, 4, and 5, you also have to comply with the manufacturing guidelines of the specific product that you're installing as well. Last important things that I've highlighted on here are, again, just the current advice is that BESS 3 must be installed outside. So any batteries must be installed outside for apartment blocks. We're aware that this requirement limits the number of installations that can access the incentive. So any updates, again, for anyone who's signed up with us, will receive those updates as we have them from the regulator around this topic. Also for BESS 4 and 5, just be aware that the battery can be installed inside. That's totally fine, but you do just need a photo of a compliant smoke alarm installed with it and ensure it meets any specific clearance requirements from AS5139. This would actually be an example of a risk mitigation photo that you might take for a fire hazard. So that's a nice example to include. Additionally, all photos must be date stamped and geotagged. As long as you take all the photos in our app, this requirement will be covered. So now I'm going to move on to just some examples of evidence and some clarifications around some of the evidence requirements. So for network approvals, we believe that this is pretty straightforward with the DNSP to just turn the battery on. If this isn't straightforward, please tell us so that we can work on solutions for you. For CDCs and DAs, both need their relevant documentation and certifications from builders or private certifiers completed and attached to the planning application. So you do need a certificate to be done to get a CDC or a DA. And then the approval of your application in both of these methods go through the New South Wales planning portal. So that approval of the application is the thing that we require to be able to create the certificates for you. So BESS 3 technically is installed in a residential zone. So under the legislation. So A CDC is required for battery installs of batteries from 20 to 100 kilowatt hours. And over that 100 kilowatt hour mark to the 200 kilowatt hour size, you do require a DA currently, is the advice that we have. In commercial zones, however, the legislation is slightly different. So for that small scale commercial, all batteries between that 20 to 200 kilowatt hour size do require a CDC, which is that fast tracked approval pathway. It takes about 10 to 20 days to get an approval once you've done your application in the planning portal. And then for BESS 5, there is a DA requirement for all batteries. So all batteries over 200 kilowatt hours do require a DA. Now, we are aware that there is some questions about how to access a CDC. Again, we're expecting some more advice from IPART shortly about this, and we will be able to update you as soon as we have further advice. But I just wanted to confirm that at the moment, this is what is required. Now, for examples for AS 5139 compliance, again, this is only relevant for BESS 3 and 4, but I just wanted to explain because I am aware that this isn't typically something that you might do in your normal business process, especially these site maps. But we just require a site map of the battery location. They can be hand drawn or digitally drawn, and it just has to be, you know, from the installer of where they actually installed the battery. Then we also have the risk assessment. It's all detailed in the standard AS 5139 of what's required, but we have also created a template for you that might help you just to complete this requirement. And we're more than happy to circulate that to any of our customers who sign up with us to help them fast track their claims.
Already touched on this in the previous slides, but using Geo and the GET on-site app is really critical for success here. So for those of you that haven't used it before, this is a program that we have designed in-house by our wonderful developers here. So you'll use Geo, which is the web platform, to set up your job. Go ahead and issue your nomination forms straight away, as that's one of the pre-install requirements. You can do that via the app as well, but it's always handy to just jump onto Geo and do that. You'll fill in all of the details, purchases details, the battery you're installing, the PV system, whatever is applicable to your upgrade. Once that's all complete, you're able to capture the rest of your agreement. So this can all be done electronically. There's no need to sign any paper forms or anything like that. And then all of your photo requirements will be on the app as well. It will show installers what is required versus what is an optional photo. And as we've mentioned throughout this presentation so far, using the on-site app will ensure that the photos are geotagged, which is really important for compliance with PERC creation and also for STC creation as well. And we've also got a range of wonderful customer service officers here that are able to assist you with any queries that you have in relation to the app or the web platform. So we're certainly here to help. Next slide, please, Maddie. Thank you. Cool. So what do you need to do to get started? If you haven't signed up with us already, that will be your first step. So you'll need to sign a relationship agreement with us. We will also need to have valid electrical licenses at the company level from the New South Wales government. We need a products and public liability insurance. And then for each installer, they need to hold a valid electrician's license. So that can be as a contractor or a supervisor. The installers will need to complete our training module for the scheme. And then you also need to have the relevant SAA accreditation for any BESS 3 or 4 work. So that's design and or install. And those requirements obviously are relevant for your STC creation as well. Next slide, please, Maddie. Just to run through the timeline of your job install again. So obviously first step is to get signed up with us. You'll quote the job, apply your discount, and at this point you'll send through the iPart fact sheet with the quote to your customer. The next step is to obviously make sure that you have your valid licenses. Installers have completed their ACP training before the install. That's really important here as well. The other main thing to do prior to your install is get that nomination form signed by your customer. We really cannot stress how critical this is. And then obviously getting your planning and network approvals in place. You'll then be able to collect all of your pre-upgrade evidence at the site and then go ahead with your install. A reminder that you need to install any PV within 90 days of the battery install to access those higher incentives under the PDRS. Once the install has taken place, you will submit the job through to us. We will then go through and check everything and make sure that everything is ticking all of the boxes. If there's any missing documentation, we will, send you a request for further information, and we can work with your teams to get anything resolved that is outstanding there. And then once we've got all of the compliant information, we send that off to the regulator, and you get paid. And so then obviously we will handle any other further communications with the relevant regulators. We'll loop you in if and when that's necessary. But yeah, we'll handle all of that tricky regulator side of things. So yes, thank you, Maddie. That's all for that one. Perfect. And just a few tips for success. Have the purchaser sign the nomination form when the quote is accepted. As said, we really want you to do this as soon as possible, because if you don't do the nomination, if the nomination form is not accepted prior to the completion of the install, you're going to end up with an ineligible installation. Send us a list of products that you intend to install so that we can verify their eligibility. Use the on-site app for all of your evidence collection. Consult the relevant standards to ensure that the battery is installed in a compliant location and labelled correctly. Again, we can also provide assistance with this and making sure that you're including the GST in your invoice and payment evidence to ensure that the minimum co-payment is met. Thank you, Maddie. Right, I'll leave this up here with a few contact details for you so that you can go ahead and get signed up if you haven't already. But we're more than happy to go ahead and take some questions now.
Yeah, I might stop sharing now, just so that I can see the questions that are coming through.
Perfect.
But yeah, thanks so much, Tiana, for that one. So just heading on over to the questions. Now, we had a couple that came through already on the sign-up forms that I might just take a look through and take a read through right now. So one of the questions was definitely around, what are the options for hedging, considering that this is a market-based incentive that does fluctuate. We have a couple of different methods that you can use. So one would be to create and transfer the certificates. So we're more than happy to create certificates for you and then actually transfer those certificates over to your own account so that then you can trade them on whatever forwards you decide to lock in, or manage your own cash flow in that way to be able to sell when you would like for those PRCs. Another option would be a price lock-in contract. We're more than happy to discuss price lock-in contracts with people, and so just chat to our team about the different options and the risks involved with each. Another one that we had was any incentives for EV chargers. So there is vehicle to grid bidirectional charging coming, but it's currently not active. So it is an activity under the PDRS currently. It's called V2G1, but we are waiting for ministerial sign off on this one. There was another question about VPPs. This own webinar has been pretty information intensive, but we're more than happy to chat to you directly about, VPPs and how to take advantage of different incentives that are available there, as well as just the benefits of signing up to VPPs under this program. Another question was just around, how many PRCs do we get installed on each kilowatt. Each of the different activities have different formulas, and then there's different threshold sizes within each activity. So there's not really a standard, formula being like you install 1 kilowatt hour, you'll get this incentive for every single activity. But we do have a calculator that we'll be launching on our website that we can share with you, as well as a calculator that will be available in Geo, so you can quote all of your jobs there. Were there any interesting questions that we wanted to answer?
I think Al's answered the question about off-grid solar PV being eligible to claim STCs up to 1 megawatt hour. So just to reiterate what Alistair has said, we don't know for certain at this stage because the formalised guidance and regulations have not been announced yet. But under 100 kilowatt hours, you can claim PV STCs that are off-grid. But just, yeah, stay tuned to get that confirmation, I would say. Maddie, there's a question about CDC 100% not able to pass for BESS 5.
Yes, that is correct. So in the legislation, it's very specific legislation around what is a complying development or an exempt development under the transport legislation. And it does specifically talk about battery sizes and thresholds. So batteries under 20 kilowatt hours are considered a exempt development, which means that you don't need a CDC or a DA. All you need is the approval from the DNSP to turn the battery on. However, because all of the batteries start from 20 to 200 kilowatts in this space, so that's for BESS 4 and 5, that's where it's very clear in the legislation that it is a CDC. So it's a complying development, which means you need a complying development certificate. So then that's only up to batteries that are 200 kilowatt hours in commercial zones. So then once you're hitting over that threshold, 100% you need a DA.
Cool. Thanks, Maddie. Then we've got a question, does all installation labour at site have to have SAA installer accreditation or just the person supervising the install? So that would obviously be whoever is being listed as your primary installer. They need to have the appropriate SAA accreditation for whatever they are doing. There just shouldn't be anybody solely responsible for that job that is not accredited, obviously.
100%. And anyone who, they are supervising at the site and may not hold the relevant license or accreditation must not be doing any work that actually needs to be done by someone who needs to hold those licenses.
Yeah. So for example, if you only have an SAA accreditation for a standalone power system, so off-grid, you can't be doing an on-grid system. Yeah.
I can see a question about farms and farming business activity. So being eligible, and also a question about residential premises under the same NMI being eligible. So there is some grey area if the NMI is linked to a residential premises. There may be some risk in that. Typically we go by building classification. So where is the battery actually being installed at the site? Is it being installed at the home, or is it being installed at an actual commercial premise? And those commercial premises are according to those definitions under the NCC. Again, anything really specific about, the eligibility criteria of if a specific building is eligible, we would really recommend that you just send through the address to us so that we can check the eligibility criteria. There's another way that you can do this, which is by obtaining like a fire safety certificate or an occupation certificate for the building, or There is another one. You can also do it through a CDC. But there's a couple of different building certificates. Sorry, it's a construction certificate that you can use. So if you have access to any of those for any of the buildings that are being upgraded with a battery, you can rely on those as evidence to declare the BCA, and then we will validate that externally as well to ensure that it definitely makes 100% sense.
Maddie, there's just some questions seeking clarity about the 90-day rule for the PV, like which side of the battery it needs to be installed on.
Yeah, so definitely the PV needs to be installed first and then the battery installation for us to claim the PRCs, because if the PV hasn't been installed, then it would just be a standalone battery installation for us to claim the PRCs. So yes.
I think it's worth noting as well, if you're looking to claim STCs, you must have you must be connecting that battery to a PV system. So if you're installing something brand new, your PV and battery system either need to be commissioned on the same date or the PV needs to be commissioned first. So hopefully that clarifies that one there. We've got, is there a fact sheet or checklist for installers to ensure all requirements are met? The on-site app will be a great source of that for the installers, because we'll have listed all the different photo buckets that need to be filled. But I believe we've got something to send out as well, Maddie, is that?
Yeah, we will definitely have training material that will be supplied. So one of those is the online training modules that all installers have to do. So that'll train them in these kinds of requirements, but also we'll have like a one-pager that confirms just in a list all of the requirements to make sure that you're not missing anything for your jobs.
Cool. Thank you, Maddie. And we've got a question. What if a site already has an off-grid battery, then decided to upgrade and add a new battery and register the total under a single NMI? Will there still be an incentive? Well, if it's another off-grid battery, then that won't be eligible, but I'm assuming that the question is about if the second battery was then on-grid. I think we'd have to probably get clarification on that question.
It sounds to me like that would be if it's a site that is off-grid, which I expect it probably would already be off-grid because it's using the battery that's existing and installed at the site, then you would not be able to claim this under the peak demand reduction scheme, because there's no actual alleviation of the load for that specific site. So this incentive is aimed at reducing demand on the actual grid at peak times, which is why it's so essential for the battery to be installed at a premise that is connected to the grid. So if you're installing a battery that's not connected to the grid, then there'll be no peak demand reduction on the actual grid.
Oh, there's a hand up as well. Nope, they left. Okay.
All good. There was also just a question about, will there be a recording of the webinar? So we are currently recording this webinar, and we're happy to circulate it post this information session. There was another question about, on the evidence requirements page, you mentioned that it states on BESS 4, $1,000 GST. BESS 4 is $5,000 GST. Can you explain that more in detail? I think I will just explain the co-payment again. So basically, under the peak demand reduction scheme, you have to charge a minimum amount for the battery installation. So that can be for the equipment or the install, so the actual labor of the install. Under BESS 3, you have to charge your customer, the purchaser, a minimum of $1,000 plus GST And that means that we need payment evidence of at least $1,100 because it includes that GST portion. We have to validate that. Then under BESS 4, it's a minimum of $5,000. So for apartment blocks, you have to charge a minimum of $1,000 plus GST. For BESS 4, it's a minimum of $5,000 plus GST. So for that small commercial scale implementation, you have to charge your customer at least $5,000 plus GST, and then we need that minimum payment evidence of at least $5,500. So I hope that kind of clears that one off. And we're on 4 p.m. So we might leave it there. If you do have further questions, again, more than happy for people to reach out to us at our head office, or if you're already in touch with a representative from either of our companies, feel free to keep talking and asking questions of them. But thanks so much for joining today.